They didn't drop bombs. They dropped birds. 1 million of them. Not missiles, not aid, but 1 million ostriches, dumped into the wild deserts of West Africa, not for meat, not for zoos, but to fight war. A war against hunger. A war against dependency. A war against the West. And the man who did it, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, young, uncompromising, armed not with weapons but with a vision so radical, it made the world laugh. But they're not laughing now. Across Burkina Faso, the ground shakes under giant feet. The sky darkens with dust. Fields once empty now echo with the sound of survival and chaos. Ostriches are eating locusts, trampling snakes, chasing rodents, and sometimes tearing through farmland. Is this brilliance or madness? A miracle or ecological suicide? Because when a nation releases 1 million wild birds into the desert and calls it independence, something bigger is happening. Captain Ibrahim, latest news. When the first convoy arrived, people thought it was a mistake. Hundreds of trucks rolled into the savannah under the punishing Sahel sun, not carrying soldiers. Not foreign cargo, but giant crates, the kind used for war animals or weapons. Instead, inside each cage, ostriches, wild-eyed, feathered giants, claws like knives, necks stretching taller than most men. And then the gates opened. Thousands of birds thundered out onto the land. A storm with feathers. Villagers dropped their tools. Children ran, screaming and laughing. Elders wept. And the soldiers, they just stood there, notebooks in hand, not rifles, recording what might become the largest animal release in human history. 1 million ostriches. In 12 months. No fences. No retreat. This wasn't chaos. This was doctrine. Captain Ibrahim Traoré had signed the order himself. No one saw it coming. Not the West. Not even his own cabinet. A biological army. Not built in labs, but born in Africa. Raised in Africa. Unleashed for Africa. These were not pets. They were not tourist attractions. They were soldiers, sent to reclaim a land plagued by locusts, rodents, venom, and hunger. Burkina Faso, or as some elders now call it, Burkina Faso, had been at war for decades. But this time, it wasn't rebels or regimes. It was nature itself. Locusts devouring entire harvests, snakes slithering into homes, rats gutting grain silos, children growing up with protein deficiency so severe, their bones bent before they could walk. The solution? Not pesticides, not GMOs, not another cargo ship from Europe with instructions written in French. Captain Ibrahim said no. His message was clear. We will not fight poison with poison. We will fight nature with nature. And nature, in this case, looked like a 7-foot-tall bird capable of eating snakes, whole and running faster than any predator in the Sahel. Ostriches, not imported. Ours, indigenous, ancient, African. Traoré's gamble was rooted in science, survival, and sovereignty. Biologists briefed him. An ostrich can eat over 50 kilograms of pests a year. It thrives in dry climate, requires less water than goats or cattle. Its eggs are equivalent to 20 chicken eggs, enough protein for a whole family. Its meat, lean, nutritious, sellable. Its hide, worth its weight in leather. Its presence, terrifying to predators and pests alike. And most importantly, its origin, African, not patented in a Western lab. This was not just ecology, it was politics. For decades, Burkina Faso relied on fertilizers and pesticides imported from Europe, expensive, delayed, sometimes tied to political pressure. But Traoré refused to be strangled by dependency. He wanted sovereignty that stretched beyond flags and borders into the soil itself. The ostrich, it declared, would be his declaration of independence. And so the releases began, wave after wave, across regions. From the grasslands of the north to the deserts of the south, ostriches took to the land like they had never left. Within weeks, reports poured in, fewer snake bites, rodents vanishing, fields quieter at night, and one shocking trend, children showing up to school healthier. But this wasn't just biology at work, it was psychology. A shift For the first time in years, the people saw a solution that wasn't shipped in. They saw something African, big, powerful, fearless. Captain Ibrahim. Latest news wasn't about a speech or a summit. It was about action. Real. Dust-kicking. Fence-breaking action. Of course, not everyone celebrated. Whispers emerged. Warnings. Skeptics scoffed. 1 million ostriches. That's madness. That's not a strategy. That's a circus. A medieval idea in the age of drones and data. But Traoré didn't flinch, because he knew something they didn't. He wasn't just trying to fix the land. He was trying to fix the mind. He was telling a hungry, neglected nation, we don't need their science. We don't need their pity. We have our own weapons, and they run on 2 legs. At first, the ostriches were met not with fear, but laughter and awe. In the sun-scorched villages of Kar, children sprinted after the towering birds, laughing as their dust trails painted the horizon. For people who had grown up with famine, with insects tearing crops apart, with rodents chewing through grain at night, the sight of a predator on their side sparked something deeper than curiosity. It sparked hope. Parents who had once begged for mosquito nets now whispered stories of ostriches chasing pests from village edges. Vendors in the bustling markets of Ouagadougou dreamed aloud of the day when ostrich eggs each the size of a baby's head would become staples on dinner tables. Soldiers assigned to the release zones watched in disbelief. Their rifles were replaced with notebooks. Their missions changed from defense to documentation. Even trucks struggled to contain the force of the birds. The moment the gates opened, they exploded out like a hurricane of feathers. Some described it as biblical. One farmer said, "When the dust rose, it felt like the land itself was breathing again." Another swore he saw the ground move before the birds appeared, like the ancestors were waking up. But as the celebration grew louder, so did the whispers. Elders warned, when man bends nature too far, nature always bends back. Some villagers feared for their crops. Would the birds eat pests? Or everything? The government reassured. The releases were staggered, monitored. The Ministry of Agriculture promised control cycles, data collection, and scientific oversight. But for many, those words felt as thin as the desert air. Still, the momentum was undeniable. In the capital, journalists dubbed it the Feather Revolution. Local radio sang songs about the soldiers with no guns. Even school attendance began to improve. With rural teachers reporting fewer sick children, clinics noted a drop in snake bites and scorpion stings. No one could prove it was the ostriches. But no one could deny the change either. Burkina Faso was changing, and so were its people. You could feel it in the conversations, see it in the markets, hear it in the prayers. For the first time in decades, a solution had come from within, not from foreign consultants, not from United Nations warehouses. And that mattered, because when survival looks like you, runs like you, eats what you fear, you start believing again. But across the ocean, the reaction was different, very different. European environmental groups issued scathing reports. This is ecological roulette, a short-term miracle that may end in long-term collapse. Western analysts mocked the policy as medieval, calling it a PR stunt by a young president, desperate for headlines. Social media lit up with ridicule memes of ostriches crushing fences. Sarcastic hashtags like African Bird Brigade. One viral post showed a flock stomping through farmland with the caption, Burkina's Birdemic. But back in Burkina Faso, or as the villagers called it, Burkina Faso, none of that mattered. Because they could feel the difference. In Koudougou, a farmer named Isa stood next to his field and pointed to the bare soil. "No rats this time," he said. "They were chased out. I saw it with my own eyes. The ostrich ran faster than my dog, and the numbers backed him." In just one harvest cycle, government data showed a 12% increase in agricultural output in test regions. Modest, but measurable. Real. Still, doubts crept in. Was it sustainable? Could 1 million birds be tracked, fed, or reined in? Once they started breeding in the wild, and most chilling of all, what if they turned? What if the saviors became destroyers? Yet despite the fear, one thing was clear. The ostrich had become more than an animal. It was a symbol of defiance. of independence, of Africa not begging, but building, not waiting, but running fast, forward, and unafraid. This was the deeper power of Traoré's gamble. Not just food, not just pest control, but pride. At first, they were guardians. By midsummer, they became suspects. In the Central Plateau, fences snapped like twigs. Seedlings disappeared overnight. Fields carefully tended by hand were left flattened by hoofprints, the size of dinner plates. The farmers knew this was no goat, no cow. This was the work of the birds, the same birds sent to protect them. In Kudigo, a man woke up to find half his maize trampled by what he called a feathered hurricane. He didn't see the birds. He heard them. The sound, he said, was like thunder in a stampede. They didn't walk, he whispered. They charged. Soon, the complaints multiplied. Cattle herders reported ostriches harassing their goats at waterholes. A young boy was kicked by one of the birds, his leg broken. Chickens were found crushed. Their coops destroyed not by predators, but by creatures that didn't even eat them. Then came the photos. Circulating on WhatsApp and radio stations, dead hens, blood in the dust, massive footprints fading into the sand. Some called it fake news. But the fear was real. And then the leak. A confidential report from the Ministry of Agriculture was published by a local journalist. Inside, shouts, crop damage, widespread, injuries to civilians, confirmed, livestock harassment, increasing, ostrich population growth, faster than expected, and the warning, if unchecked, ostriches may destabilize rural livelihoods and erode public trust. Erode public trust. That was the quiet way of saying, this could burn everything down. Suddenly, what had been praised as the miracle of the Sahel became the monster of the savannah. Markets in Ouagadougou, once filled with jokes about ostrich omelettes, turned tense. People argued. Traders asked, did we release soldiers or savages? What if we created something worse than the pests? And perhaps most haunting, the whispers from the elders. When man commands nature with arrogance, one said, nature will always answer back. The pressure mounted. International media pounced. The ostrich experiment backfires. Africa's giant bird gamble in crisis. Captain Traoré loses control of feathered army. European environmentalists declared victory. We warned them, and now, the land pays the price. But inside Burkina Faso, the debate wasn't academic. It was survival. Families who had celebrated meat and eggs now feared losing their crops. Farmers who once trusted the government began boarding up their fences with whatever wood they could find. And yet President Traoré did not back down. In a surprise national broadcast, his eyes sharp, voice steady, he addressed the chaos head-on. Yes, mistakes were made. Yes, some birds ran wild. But no, this was not the end. Because what the world didn't know was this. This was only phase one. From the very beginning, the plan was never to let the ostriches roam forever. It was always a cycle. Release, control, harvest. Reinvest. And so he unveiled L'Era de Lotus, the Circle of Ostriches. A system of strategic capture and redistribution. The birds would serve first as pest control, then as livestock, then as export, food, leather, wealth. Nothing wasted. The nation gasped. What critics called chaos, Traoré called economy. And in that moment, one truth was clear. This was not just about birds anymore. This was about sovereignty on Burkina Faso's terms. But as the dust rose and the world watched, a deeper question echoed across the continent. If you believe this is what Africa needed all along, say amen. In the comments below, they called it chaos. But he called it a circle. When the global media mocked Burkina Faso's ostrich release as a biological disaster, they expected silence or surrender. Instead, Captain Ibrahim Traoré did what few leaders dared. He doubled down. In a nationally televised address flanked not by soldiers but by farmers and schoolchildren, Traoré unveiled the hidden strategy behind what the world thought was recklessness. We were never unleashing chaos. He declared, we were building a circle, a living cycle. A future not borrowed but grown. They called it L'Era de Lotus, the Circle of Ostriches. A plan forged in simplicity but executed with precision. Phase 1. Release the birds into the wild to decimate pests. Phase 2. Harvest the population in rotating cycles, turning the birds into food, materials, and income. Phase 3. Reinvest the proceeds into schools, clinics, cooperatives, and infrastructure. And it worked. In the first full harvest year, over 20,000 tons of ostrich meat were distributed across public institutions. Rural hospitals began serving ostrich broth to malnourished patients. Military kitchens fed thousands of troops with lean, high-protein meals. Public schools, for the first time in memory, offered meat twice a week. One boy in the northern town of Wahi grinned between spoonfuls. "We used to get porridge, now we get meat. I feel strong." Ostrich eggs, once seen as exotic, were cracked open at family tables. Each one, equal to 20 chicken eggs, could feed an entire household. Mothers in the countryside wept as they prepared breakfast for children who once cried from hunger. But the circle didn't stop in the kitchen. Ostrich leather, thick, patterned, and prized by designers, began flooding local workshops. Artisans crafted belts, bags, shoes, and jackets proudly stamped "Made in Faso." Feathers, once discarded, it was sold to theatre troupes and fashion houses abroad. By the second year, Burkina Faso latest news made global headlines. Ostrich industry surpasses $50 million in export revenue. Faso feathers in Paris Fashion Week. From dust to dignity, Africa's boldest economic gamble pays off. What began as a survival plan had become an engine driving rural employment, domestic consumption, and international trade. In Ka, farmers who once walked miles for grain now walked into ostrich cooperatives to sell hides and eggs. In Tsenoa, youth who once dreamed of escaping the village now applied for training in ostrich management and processing. In Ouagadougou, women-owned workshops sprang up stitching leather goods for markets as far as Accra and Nairobi. Even regional governments took notice. Mali launched its own pilot ostrich farm. Nia requested breeding assistance. Ghana sent agricultural students to study the Burkinabe model. The Sahel, so often dismissed as a belt of crisis, was now exporting innovation. And yet, backlash returned louder, sharper. Western NGOs accused the program of cruelty, warning that mass harvesting of once wild birds violated environmental ethics. European agencies questioned sanitary conditions, claiming that rushed industrialization may breed disease. Critics painted visions of a boom-and-bust collapse, driven by overexploitation. But Traoré's administration was ready. Veterinary data showed stable populations for every 100 ostriches harvested. 70 to 90 more hatched. Strict processing standards were enforced. Surveillance teams monitored wild populations weekly. And for the first time, Burkina Faso invited international observers to inspect the supply chain. Most declined. But on the ground, no one cared about Parisian opinions. They cared about food. They cared about jobs. They cared about pride. In Benora, a mother of 4 held up an ostrich egg and said, "This is not just breakfast. It's freedom." In the capital's night market, a former taxi driver opened a grill stand, serving grilled ostrich steak with sweet yam sauce. He sold out every night. "I used to wait for tourists." He laughed. Now, the locals are the market. And that's what the circle became. Not just an economic policy, but a cultural rebirth. From meat to leather, feathers to hope, ostriches had woven themselves into the identity of a rising nation. The same bird mocked as prehistoric now stood at the center of Africa's most ambitious turnaround. Burkina Faso had taken the largest gamble in its history and turned it into a revolution. But revolutions are fragile. And as the money flowed and exports boomed, another question began to rise. If so much power now rested on one species, what would happen if that species failed? For all the triumphs, the protein, the exports, the pride there is a deeper tremor beneath the savannah's dust. Burkina Faso stands not only triumphant, but exposed. For what is sovereignty if built on a single fragile pillar? The ostriches, now millions strong, are beginning to show cracks. In the dry season, when winds scorch the earth and waterholes disappear, the birds migrate in search of moisture. They stray into farming zones. They crowd near rivers, upsetting wild ecosystems. In one village, a water source dried up entirely, forcing ostriches to dig at the riverbed. Muddying water, used by herds. Goats refused to drink. Children caught waterborne illnesses. The very symbol of salvation risked becoming a vector of suffering. And then there's disease. Wild populations are unpredictable. A sudden outbreak of avian flu or a parasite, something long dormant, could sweep through flocks unchecked. Veterinary inspectors raise alarms. Current infrastructure is overstretched. Processing plants are busy. Meat export is booming. But labs, the capacity for monitoring emerging threats, limited. Climate change adds another layer. Ever hotter days. Unpredictable rainfall. Desert winds advancing. As land degrades, feeding grounds shrink. Nesting grounds vanish. Ostriches are resilient, yes, but not invincible. Living well on the edge still demands resources. Food, space, water. When those are stripped away, resiliency becomes desperation. Then come markets. The world's taste is fickle. Demand for ostrich leather, eggs, meat may rise today but could collapse tomorrow if prices, quality, or global trade barriers shift. Dependence on a single export product always carries risk. Most troubling, the psychological fragility, the sense that hope may be fleeting. For many in Burkina Faso, the ostrich experiment is more than economics. It is dignity. It is a declaration. We can feed ourselves. We can sell what we grow. We don't beg anymore. But what if that declaration falters? Scholarships, cooperatives, export deals all rest on stability. If a drought wipes out a generation of birds, or disease spreads, people might once more lose faith. And that loss of faith could be worse than any crop failure. Yet, this moment of danger is also a moment of decision. The fight for the future demands more than courage. It requires structure, science, foresight. Here are the guardrails they must build. Robust monitoring systems, mobile veterinary units, field labs, disease surveillance, ecological planning, rotating release zones, preserving water sources, rehabilitating soil, genetic diversity, ensuring ostrich populations are not genetically bottlenecked, so they resist disease and adapt, alternative livelihoods. So communities aren't all ostrich-dependent, diversified agriculture, crafts, trade, climate adaptation, agroforestry, shade trees, water catchments, planning for the worst drought, flood, heat, because in this gamble, the stakes are more than food. They are legacy. If Burkina Faso survives the next decade with its circle intact, growing stable, proud, then this will not be a tale of madness. It will be a model. If not, the world will say, they soared too high, they flew too fast, and the flame of this experiment may burn out prematurely, but there is hope yet. Communities have started organizing their own ostrich savings groups. They build pens for young birds near rivers, protect nesting grounds, share veterinary knowledge. Women's co-ops sew with ostrich leather, even as they lobby for environmental protections. Young people are studying ecology, taking pride in the land, thinking long-term. Captain Ibrahim latest news now includes arguments not just about meat or export, but about conservation, ethics, balance. The fight for the future may be fragile, but it is not yet lost. And as the Sahel sun sets, what matters is this. Will they care enough to protect what they have created? Will they guard it with wisdom, sacrifice, and humility? Because Africa's rising depends not just on bold acts, but on steadfast hearts. The sun sets over the savannah, and 1,000 shadows stretch across the earth. They are not just birds. They are questions. They are warnings. They are dreams. Captain Ibrahim's latest news is no longer just about a man. It's about a movement. For too long, the world expected Africa to kneel, to wait for foreign grants, to beg for surplus food, to obey policies written in Brussels and Washington. But Burkina Faso said no. It unleashed the largest bird migration in modern history. Not as spectacle, but as statement. A statement of survival, of defiance, of belief. In the dust trails of 1 million ostriches, our nation found dignity. Fields grew stronger. Children grew healthier. Markets buzzed with life. The land itself began to whisper hope. But the story is not finished. Because even now, the climate shifts, the sands advance, disease knocks quietly, and with them, doubt. Can this circle hold? Can it evolve? Can it endure beyond the man who birthed it? This is the question not just for Burkina Faso, but for all of Africa. Will we build models that survive the test of time, or moments that flicker and fade? To the elders, to the youth, to the diaspora watching from afar, the flame is in your hands now. Captain Ibrahim's latest news is a call not to worship a bird, but to remember a truth. Sovereignty is not gifted. It is grown, and it must be guarded. So speak it loud. Let it echo in your homes and streets. Africa knew. It's time for Africa. We don't kneel. We rise. If this report unveils a hidden truth for you, don't just scroll past. Like, share, comment. Let them know we see. We remember. We won't forget. Burkina Faso. Latest news is no longer buried beneath aid. Reports. It's written in the wind, in the wings, in the will of a people unbroken. Thanks for coming. See you in the next video for news analysis. The truth they don't want you to know.